Good morning to everybody who has joined the webinar. We're going to wait for a couple of minutes for everybody to sort of filter into the call, and then we'll get started. So thanks for showing up. All right, by my estimation, we are 3 minutes past the hour. So thanks everybody for joining us today. We'll go ahead and get started. Can one of my panelists just confirm that we can hear me and see me okay?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So welcome everybody. We're really excited today to share this webinar with information about the sort of graduate application process for the MIT physics program. The way that this will work is I'm going to start by um, introducing myself, giving us a little bit of an overview of what the application process is like, and then I'm joined by many panelists who have generously given their time to help answer some of the questions that you all have submitted. You can use the QR code that's on the screen. So I'll have my panelists introduce themselves and we'll go through the questions that are submitted, and that'll sort of be the way that this is set up. So to introduce myself, my name is Swathi. I'm a third-year graduate student in the physics department, specifically in the astrophysics division. I work on high-energy astrophysics, so a lot of X-ray astrophysics, and I'll kind of leave it at that. But let's go ahead and get started. So before we begin, I just want to remind everybody that none of the things that we say are like official stances of the admissions committee and including the comments of our panelists. We're just sharing our personal opinions. Wherever possible, we're trying to make sure that this information is as accurate as possible to our understanding of how this process works. And we do work closely with the folks on the admissions committee, but there are always things in flux, and there are parts of this process that change year to year. And we, as sort of panelists and students, and we don't actually have any influence on how the admissions process goes out. So we're happy to help everybody to try and sort of put your best foot forward, but we can't really guarantee anything beyond that. And so, right, I talked about this sort of outline that we'll go for. Hopefully you've had a chance to fill out questions on the Slido, and then I'm going to walk you through some resources. Okay, so just an overview of how our application process works. So our application is due at midnight Eastern Standard Time on December 15th, and you fill out the application online. There is an application fee that's associated with submitting this application. It's $90 at MIT. This is pretty standard for many programs that you might be considering at peer institutions. And you have the opportunity, if this presents a financial barrier, to ask for a waiver. You're going to need to fill out the full contents of your application before we're able to process the waiver, and we can talk a little bit more about that later. You're also going to need to submit your transcripts. It's okay if they're unofficial transcripts for now. You're also expected to submit 3 letters of recommendation. You're technically allowed to submit more, but the committee will really only realistically be able to read 3 of them, and it might just be some random sort of subset of 3 of all of the ones that you choose. So maybe think about that. You'll also be prompted on the online application portal to list things like your research experiences, honors that you might have received, awards, things like that. You'll also be asked to write a statement of objective or a statement of purpose and an optional personal statement, and we'll go through a little bit more of what that entails. And we recommend, so the department recommends that you submit a physics GRE score. That doesn't mean it's required, but the departmental stance is recommended, and we can also answer questions about what that means if you have further questions. As far as sort of fee waivers goes, so there are sort of a couple of avenues for automatically getting a fee waiver. Applicants who have participated in certain programs like MSRP, Converge, or other MIT programs, or official MIT recruiting are eligible for fee waiver. If you don't know what those programs are, then this probably doesn't apply to you. But if you have participated in one of those, then you should definitely kind of look at this website here for a little bit more information. There's also opportunities for other folks for whom a fee waiver, or sorry, the application fee might pose a barrier to receive a fee waiver. And you can do this first through OGE, which is the Office of sort of Graduate Education, I think it is. And if you're denied from OGE, then you'll be able to submit a departmental fee waiver within the application portal, and that'll be considered sort of just within physics. And like I mentioned before, so the window is a little bit confusing, but we'll consider fee waivers before you submitted an application, but after you have completed all of the parts of the application. So if you're considering trying to request a fee waiver, we really ask that you make sure that your application is completed with sufficient lead time for us to be able to process the fee waiver, regardless of which sort of avenue you're going through. And all of the parts of the application includes like uploading your transcripts, requesting your letters of recommendation. We can't process fee waivers for incomplete applications. And so the sort of request deadline for a fee waiver is December 1st. So keep that in mind. The official deadline for submitting the application is December 15th, but the fee waiver request really is only until December 1st. And we get a lot of questions about certain standardized tests that are usually English language tests. And so there's no cutoff score for these English language proficiency tests. We don't apply cutoff scores for any of the standardized tests that we look at, including the GRE. But we do have here a couple of sort of like maybe median scores that you can take a look at if you feel like you're confused about if your English language exam scores are sort of at the equivalent level of most of our students. And if you're wondering if you need to take these exams in the first place, we require them if you're from a country in which English is not the primary language, unless you have either been in the US or in a country whose official language is English for 3 years or longer. And if you receive a degree from a college or university where the language of education instruction is English. So if you, in other words, did your undergraduate degree at an institution outside of the US, but your degree was conducted in English, then I think that you're exempted from this requirement. This is really meant for people who may have completed their education in a language that's not English. And if you have sort of more curiosities about this, then there's a little bit of additional information on the admissions website that kind of goes through these specific English language exams. We also get asked pretty frequently if you need a faculty member to sponsor you before you apply, and if you need to reach out to faculty members. And the short answer is that you do not need a faculty member to sort of agree to sponsor you to just apply. We generally recommend that you reach out to faculty after you're admitted. There might be people on the panel who have had different experiences in how they actually went about this, but you shouldn't feel pressured to get somebody in line before you submit your application. And there certainly will be plenty of time for you to figure out which faculty you'd like to work with once you've been admitted. I just want to give a couple of sort of pointers to resources. So, one of the most useful places that you can go to is our official physics.mit.edu website, where we have a page specifically for graduate admissions. And it's probably got the most comprehensive and the sort of department official stances for as much information really as should be relevant for the application process. There are a lot of useful hyperlinks for additional pieces of information. So things like an FAQ, application assistance, and some more information also about the program itself in case you have questions as you're trying to think about if MIT is a good fit for you and also what your time in the program might look like. And so that FAQ that I was talking about is very comprehensive and I think really helpful. This has also been vetted by the department. And so maybe you can take the answers in the FAQ a little bit more strongly than even some of the anecdotes that we share today. And so if you're interested, you're just going to have to scroll down or click that little link at the top of the page to take you to the FAQs. It's not its own page, but there's a bunch of drop downs that you can sort of click through depending on what your question is. And you can sort of see maybe the breadth of different questions that are on the FAQs. We'll go through many of them today, especially if you have any that are relevant and sort of submitted through the Slido, but maybe helpful to just know the scope of what is answered here. And if you have additional questions, then we'll talk about other resources that are available beyond just the FAQ. Um, just to give a really quick answer for the questions that are up here. So, do you have to have a degree in physics in order to apply? No. What are the requirements to complete the PhD? We have a whole web page. Can you take courses at other schools nearby? Yes. How many years does it take to complete the standard PhD? Between 5 to 7 years. You can pay for your studies, or your studies will be paid for through a combination of teaching assistantship, research assistantship, or fellowship. We have on the order of like 2,000 applications that are submitted each year and about 70 people that are accepted. We don't have cutoffs for any of the exams. We talked about the deadline being December 15th. We recommend that you submit the GRE. We talked about English language requirements, and we do provide application fee waivers. There's not a specific way to arrange a visit to the department, sort of especially before you apply. If you're admitted, then you'll be invited to participate in some open house activities. And can you receive an update on the status of your application? Not after submission? When will you be notified of a final decision before March 1st? And can admitted students start in a term other than the sort of subsequent fall? Rarely, there are some specific circumstances that might warrant a sort of exception to the standard rule, but we'd expect that if you submit your application in December, that you'll be planning to join us for the fall. Okay. We also want to just highlight some of the resources that the students have put together. So most of us who are here today, this sort of webinar has been organized by a group called Grads Advising Grad Admissions, or GAAA, and we sort of put together this application assistance program. And you can find a bunch of information about our program and additional resources on this page here, sites.mit.edu/PhysGAAP, including recording of a past webinar, and there should be transcripts and subtitles that are available on the website. We also host office hours and mentorship program. So we'll begin starting our office hours, I believe, next week with some additional information sent out through the same mailing list that you found out about this webinar. We'll also open up the application for a one-on-one mentorship program, and we really are looking to try and serve as many people as we can, but we have only a limited number of people that we can sort of take on just based on the number of students that we have participating from MIT. And so one-on-one mentorship may be helpful for you if you feel like you lack other resources to help you navigate the application process. And also if you've used other forms of assistance, so let's say that you've attended this webinar and you've gone to office hours and maybe you have additional questions, and if you could benefit from that one-on-one application mentorship. And so again, if you're interested in this, then we'd encourage you to visit the PhysGAAP website in order to learn more. And the way that this will work is you'll submit a short application. We'll go through a matching process. If you're selected for this mentorship program, you'll be matched with a relevant mentor that's a graduate student, and you'll be able to meet with them a couple of times to answer additional questions and get support on completing your application. Okay, so now we're going to work on the Q&A. So I see that there's one question that was also submitted in the sort of Q&A option, and I'll encourage you to resubmit that question in the Slido. And there should be maybe a link in the Zoom chat that I think Chris can drop. Um, but it also should be in the email that you received in order to get the link for this meeting. And also, even if you don't have questions, you can upvote existing questions. And we might not be able to answer everything, but like we talked about, we'll have additional resources for us to be able to help answer questions. So Chris really helpfully dropped the link to the Slido. And maybe I'll leave this QR code up as our panelists introduce themselves, and then maybe we can switch over the screen sharing after that's done, so that Chris can help, or Chris can pull up the Slido. Okay, so why don't we begin by having our panelists introduce themselves? Maybe we can start. I'll just name people in the order I see them on my screen. Michael, Reef.
Hi everyone, I'm Michael. So I am a fourth year in the physics department, also in astrophysics. Um, and I sort of work on galaxy clusters, observational studies at many different wavelengths. And I'm also one of the co-chairs of GAAGA, so I can help answer any questions that you all have. And I look forward to our discussion.
Thanks, Michael. Next, I see Kaylin.
Hi everyone, my name is Kaylin. I'm a third year also in Astro. I work in the LEGO laboratory trying to understand the formation channels of binary black holes observed through gravitational waves. I'm also one of the co-chairs of GAGA, so I also have further information about the mentorship and one-on-one matching process.
Thanks, Kaylin. Next up, I have Jenny.
Hi, everyone. I am not a student. I am the grad coordinator, so part of the academic programs office here in the physics department. And I help with the admissions process, as well as our current wonderful graduate students.
Thanks, Jenny. Next up is Chris.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chris. I'm a fourth year PhD student, also in the astrophysics division. Yeah, excited to chat with y'all.
Great. Next up, I see Kyle.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kyle. I'm a sixth year PhD student in atomic physics doing experiments with trapped ions for quantum computing.
Thanks, Kyle. Next up, I see Megan, who I know might not stay with us the whole time, but if you want to introduce yourself really quickly.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Megan. I'm a 6th-year grad student in Astro. I work on observations of supermassive black holes.
Thanks, Megan. Next up is Shelley.
Hi, I'm Shelly. I'm a first year in New Pax. I work on the CMS experiment and machine learning.
Thanks. And next up, we have Michael number 2.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm a first year in condensed matter physics, and I work on analyzing 2D materials with optical experimentation.
Awesome. Thanks. And I think last up, I have Eleanor.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm a first year in condensed matter experiment. And similar to Michael, I also work on the ultraviolet spectroscopy of materials.
Cool. So I'm gonna stop my share and maybe Chris, did you want to share your screen with the Slido?
Sure thing.
Okay.
Just a second. How does that look?
Yep, we can see the screen. So I'll go based on the sort of most upvoted questions, and panelists, if you have, if you're interested in answering the question, then maybe you can raise your hand and go ahead and just start speaking. Okay, so it looks like the first question, or the most upvoted question, is how does the personal statement differ from the statement of purpose? What sort of experience/info would you recommend putting in the personal statement? Eleanor?
Yeah, so having recently gone through the application process, I can talk a bit about this. So I say it's different in that the statement of purpose, I really focused on my research and kind of my trajectory through science, like what was my first research experience, how did I like end up doing what I'm doing now. Whereas in the personal statement, I talked a bit more about kind of like my extracurriculars, like things I was involved with. I remember I talked about like a mentorship program that I was involved with and some other initiatives in the department and kind of like showing different sides to me and how I contribute to my community.
Yeah, I think that was pretty comprehensive. Does anyone have anything to add here, or else we can move on to the next question?
I have something to add.
Yeah.
Yeah, so also the personal statement is a great way to include, for example, if you feel like something happened during your undergraduate studies that prevented you from getting maybe the grade that you were hoping to get, or your reasonings why you chose to add the GRE or not, the personal statement is a great way to kind of show some hardships, challenges that you've faced, and also goals that you have in your graduate studies.
Yeah, really helpful addition. Okay, it looks like the next question is, I was wondering if current funding limitations might affect the number of students the MIT Physics Department plans to admit this year. Can you please comment on that? And maybe I can go ahead and answer this. The short answer is that we're not entirely sure what this will look like. It might be different division to division, but as of now, we really don't have any further information about exactly what that change might look like, or if there's going to be any specific reduction in terms of the number of students being admitted or anything like that. I think a lot of that will also probably depend on the federal funding outcome that comes after this government shutdown. So I don't know if anybody else has anything more specific to share, but unfortunately, that's really all we have for now. Okay, it seems like maybe we can move on to the next question, which is, what is a typical amount of research experience and/or publications that you see in a strong applicant?
I can hop in to say that first, no publications are required for admission. There are plenty of people admitted each year who've never published a work either as a co-author or a first author. Because the key part of a PhD is performing research, typically strong applicants do have some amount of research experience, usually at least one or two summer internships or throughout the school year where they've put a lot of work into a particular project. But there are other ways to demonstrate proficiency and proficiency in research. For instance, someone who, due to their personal circumstances or how their university structures research, they didn't have access to as many outside research internships. The GRE may be a good option to demonstrate physics proficiency and potential in research. But I would say that in general, most people do have some level of experience.
Yeah, I'll also add, like Kaylin said, it is definitely not a requirement to have any publications, but every year the application pool gets more and more competitive, and so it is sort of becoming an unwritten way that it is used to distinguish stronger candidates from less strong candidates. So it definitely helps your application if you do have some research to your name, but it's not necessarily a detriment if you have other strong qualities that make up for it.
Yeah, I will say, like, I personally didn't have any publications going into it. But like, yeah, just did a lot of research like over the summers and during the semesters as well.
Yeah, I'll maybe also add that not all fields or subfields have the same expectations for publication. So I work also on hardware development for telescopes, and for this kind of work, it's more common to publish work as proceedings at a conference rather than as a sort of traditional peer-reviewed publication. And so it might not look exactly like you submit to whatever the traditional journal is in your subfield. It could also be something like either a conference presentation or a conference paper proceeding or something like that. And all of those will also help support your overall narrative that you're a strong researcher that should be capable of taking on graduate school research. Okay, were there any other comments on this question? Otherwise, we can move on. All right. It looks like the next question is, I noticed that some MIT professors have expressed via their personal websites that they will not be taking graduate students this year due to current national science funding climate. Does this impact how one should approach applying?
I can attempt to answer this. So to some extent, yes, there is you will be asked in your statement of purpose to talk about who you believe your research interest aligns with and who you would see yourself working with. And it's typical, a good idea to list 2 to 3 professors and describe your alignment with their research interests. So if you note that specific professors with whom your research aligns, if you see that they are publicly disclosing that they aren't accepting students, then your statement of purpose should not only include those professors. I would say it's okay to mention that your research aligns with them, but it should definitely include professors who have a chance of accepting students in your statement of purpose. And yeah, I think that's the most obvious way to approach this concern.
Just to add to that, I feel like it's also just, it never hurts to ask and reach out to the professor. It kind of touches on the next question, but like, not necessarily, I didn't experience this with MIT, but there were other universities I applied to where a professor had on their website, I'm not taking any students, but it was just an old thing that they had never updated. And I had a conversation with them and they said that they were taking students. And so I ended up applying and mentioning them. But so it is just, it never hurts to ask the professor specifically. So,
I'll
Yeah.
add to this. Jenny,
Go
go
ahead.
for it.
No, go for it.
Okay. So I'll add to this, kind of going back to the very first question too that was asked about the statement of purpose versus personal statement. As several of us have said, I mean, the point of a PhD is to produce a body of research work. And So in your application, you're not only trying to show your capability for research, but also your fit with the institution and the professors who you might be working with there. So as people have, I think that part of the statement of purpose should perhaps be longer and a little more thought out than you may think initially, that you really do want to show your fit with the institution and the professors. So if there are professors who say, in the year 2025 to 6, I will not be taking any students, period, then, again, it doesn't hurt to say that your research aligns with them, but I wouldn't spend too much space saying I want to apply because I'm going to work with this person.
Yes, Kellen, that is a perfect segue actually to what I was going to say. So a big thing to keep in mind is that you're applying to the physics department. You're not applying to work with a particular faculty member. Your course of your graduate studies may change after a semester or after even a couple of years. You may end up working regardless with a different faculty member. So again, you don't need that faculty sponsorship. Their website might be outdated or things may change. So again, just keep in mind you're applying to the program as a whole.
Yeah, okay. Thanks everyone for all of these insights. I think we can go ahead and move on to the next question, which is how important is it to directly contact potential advisors before submitting an application to MIT Physics? And we touched on this a little bit in the presentation, but I would be curious to hear panelists maybe sharing their own personal experience with when you contacted advisors or how you contacted advisors. My personal experience was a little bit unusual in that I actually got contacted by the person who is my now advisor. And so I'd be curious to hear what everybody else's experience was like.
Yeah, so I generally heard when I was applying, like, don't bother like reaching out to the PIs because they won't respond to you unless you're asking, like, are you taking students this year? Then that's something people typically respond to. In my case here, also, like, the PI I'm now working with here, he was actually giving a talk at my school, like, that fall where I was applying. So then I reached out to him there, and then, like, he still didn't, like, we didn't meet one-on-one, but I was able to, like, chat a bit with him there and kind of, like, introduce myself. So I would say, like, if you have an opportunity, you think, like, you'll be at the same conference in the next couple months or, like, something like that, something kind of casual, then yeah, I would say, like, why not email them and see if you can meet them.
I also have the same advisor. I did end up reaching out to them before I had applied, and I actually didn't hear anything back at first. And so, but then once I applied and once they saw my application, we did end up meeting. But like, I don't think it was like I guess reaching out maybe helped. I'm not sure, but there was no response on that end until I had applied and until they had looked over my application. So.
Yeah, I also reached out to one professor and she did get back to me pretty quickly and we met over Zoom. So I'd say it's definitely worth reaching out and emailing people. I will say it doesn't necessarily increase your chances of getting in because, the faculty that you reached out to may not be on the reading committee that's going to actually read your application. So there's always a chance, but I think it's always helpful to reach out to people.
I will also add from my personal experience, I did reach out to one of the professors I was interested in working with, and he was on the application reading committee for that year. So I just got lucky in that regard. But you never know unless you try. So I think you should try. There's not really any downside. The worst case scenario is you just don't get a response from them.
Yeah. Okay, a very helpful sort of diversity of different pathways that people took. And it seems like, maybe the conclusion is that there's the opportunity to reach out to people. The success rate might not be so high in hearing back before you get accepted into the program. Yeah, to Michael's point, that there's still always the option to try and reach out. So I think we can move on to the next question, which is how important is the physics GRE to an application? And is there any sort of cutoff with the scores? I can go ahead and answer this because it's pretty straightforward. There's no cutoff score. The physics GRE is another data point to your application. If you feel like the physics GRE would really kind of harm your ability to sort of share your proficiency in physics, you're not happy with your score, or if there are significant barriers to you being able to take the GRE, you're not required to submit your scores. It's just recommended. And on the sort of flip side of that, if you feel like taking the physics GRE might be helpful to demonstrate your skills in sort of fundamental physics concepts, maybe you have a degree in something that's not physics related, or maybe you've taken off some time since you've completed your undergraduate degree, if there might be any questions about your proficiency in sort of like classroom academic physics, then this might be a good way to demonstrate proficiency, but it's by no means required. If anybody else has anything to add, I'll open the floor.
Maybe I'll just add briefly, very similar to what you were saying, but we've talked a lot about how the main point of the PhD is to produce a body of research, but you do also have to pass some classes and some exams. And so the committee is just looking to make sure that you will be successful at that. They're not looking to admit people who, are not going to be able to complete that part of the PhD. And so you just need some way somewhere in your application to be able to show that you will be able to do that, whether that's the GRE or your transcripts or anything else like that.
Yeah, this brings up a good point that maybe a useful exercise for everybody planning to apply is to look at the program requirements and also decide if you feel like you can demonstrate the ability to succeed in those other steps of the program. Good. Okay, we can move on to the next question. What are the most common strengths or weaknesses you notice in a successful versus unsuccessful application? Maybe this is a little bit difficult for many of us to describe as people who like are mostly just familiar with our applications, but maybe panelists can speak to if you feel like there were any particular elements of your application that you felt like helped you stand out in any way. Michael?
I feel like one that's not talked about like incredibly often is like I remember distinctly in my interview, I was just really excited about the research I was talking about, and the professor was like, "You seemed really like happy and excited to talk about this." And I think that that's an important thing to have is that when you're writing about research you want to do, and when you're writing about being here, you need to show how much like it is you're passionate about it, because I think that's really important to having a successful PhD is liking what you do.
I can also mention from my personal experience, I don't, this probably doesn't actually apply to a lot of the webinar participants, but I had a bit of a unique background in my undergraduate degree because I actually didn't start studying physics. I started as a film major and switched after the first year or so. And I talked about that in my application. And I think that helped stand out in sort of a unique way as someone who, didn't have a straight path in my trajectory. I took different turns and took me a while to figure out what I want to do. But that makes for a more interesting story. And so I think just the bottom line lesson is to talk about your own story. No, don't just make it sort of a super dry list of all your accomplishments. Yeah.
Maybe I'll try to address a bit of the weaknesses part because, well, I think it's hard for us to address because none of us are on the admissions committee. But from what I've heard, one, I guess, very Severe weakness is if you have something that's maybe a yellow or an orange flag, something that doesn't that appears not great on the surface, and then if you don't explain it, that can turn that into a red flag. So if you happen to have a semester where your grades were very poor, if you don't explain that, for example, in your personal statement, like it's fine that could happen to anybody. And if you justify that, or if you were from a university with very few resources to conduct research, um, it's important that you prevent yellow flags from becoming red flags. That's something that can make your application quite a bit weaker.
I'll maybe just add one of the things I thought was a strength in my application that also I think really reflected in the letters of recommendation that I received was having a lot of research independence and autonomy. So my undergraduate research project that I worked for the latter half of my undergraduate degree, um, I applied for and earned funding on my own. I was able to really drive a lot of the science question development, execution, and things like that. And I think that's maybe both a demonstration of sort of like the tangible skills that were needed in order to execute that, but also the goal of the PhD is to sort of work your way up to being maybe like an independent researcher of some kind. And so I think that that was one of the things that made me um, sort of present well in the application process. Okay, the next question is, could you please provide more details about the one-on-one mentorship program and how international applicants can join? This is also pretty straightforward. So international applicants are welcome to participate in our one-on-one mentorship program. There are no restrictions. And as for more details on the program, maybe one of my fellow co-chairs can drop a link in the chat for our website, which is going to have all of the information on what exactly the program entails and how you can apply. But the short answer is that you'll write a short application, answer a couple of questions about why the mentorship program will be helpful for you, and we'll do our best then to match you with a current MIT physics graduate student who you'll be able to meet with a couple of times between when you get matched and when the application is due.
Maybe I'll just quickly add that if you received an email about this webinar, you're already on the mailing list to receive updates with the application for that program.
Great. Next question is, how does one best balance specificity and flexibility of research interests in the application? Maybe I can go ahead and get us started. So I don't think that every person has to check both specificity and flexibility. If you come in really knowing who you want to work with and what direction you want to take, then that's, I think, a totally fine avenue. You maybe just want to make sure before you submit your application that that's actually a feasible path for you to take, given the faculty that we have here and the general sort of research topics that we're focused in. And on the other hand, if you have a few different things that you're interested in, then it's totally fine to maybe suggest a few different areas that you're interested in working in, and then maybe focusing your efforts on demonstrating how your previous experiences would make you well suited to be able to go down any of those directions. Okay, and I see Kyle has his hand raised.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to add that there are maybe some recommendations we could make about like how many faculty you might name in your application. So I suppose if there's really only one person at MIT who you would want to work with, then you shouldn't lie and put other people. But if that person doesn't happen to be taking students this year, then you may be out of luck if you only mention one person in your application. On the other hand, you don't want to mention like a dozen different faculty members because then it seems like, you're not going to have space to talk about them in any detail. And it seems like you're just kind of throwing darts and seeing what sticks. So sort of in the 2 to 3 faculty member range, I think is a common number that I've heard recommended, and just make it clear that you have thought in detail about these faculty members and who you might, why you might want to work with them and why you might be a good fit.
I'll hop on that to say, I realize, this does sort of seem like a cop-out answer to say, you don't want to be a delta function and you also don't want to be a uniform distribution. You really, the balance is just finding some mixture between those. Demonstrate that you understand a particular area of research, that you have the skills to succeed in it. But also, depending if it really is only one faculty member, then okay, just mention one. But showing that your interests may, it's good to maybe have slightly broader interests in case that person doesn't take students. In my application cycle, there was a school that I applied to where there really was only one faculty member I wanted to work with, and I said, this is what I want to do. And it worked out for me in that instance. But that may not always be the case. They're generally looking for people who understand the kind of work that they may want to do, because the committee wants to know where am I going to put this person? How are they going to contribute to our body of work here? And if they can answer that question, it doesn't have to be they're going to sit precisely there, but they need to know for them, to some level of specificity, what kind of stuff you would contribute to.
Awesome. Okay, next question is, I would like to know what MIT values more in applicants, a strong academic background or broad research experience. I think the answer here is unfortunately probably a little bit of both. And yeah, if anyone has anything to add, please chime in.
Yeah, maybe I can give the stance I've heard from some faculty, which is the goal of the admissions committee is to determine who would thrive in completing a PhD at MIT. And that means you have to be able to successfully complete the course requirements and also to conduct valuable research. So they're really looking to see in your application that you have demonstrated potential to complete the classes, whether you demonstrate that with great grades or whether you have a great GRE score or you have some other explanation demonstrating that you will succeed academically, and then that you also have demonstrated, whether it's through a bunch of your own research experience or from some other work or technical experience, that you can also be successful in doing research at MIT. It's important to demonstrate that you can do both because both are necessary to complete the PhD at MIT.
Awesome. Okay, next question. How common is being accepted into the PhD program with no publication? So here, again, you're maybe just going to get anecdote from the panel. Maybe a couple of people can just chime in with if you did have publications or if you didn't have publications, so you can get a little bit of a, yeah, like a distribution. I would say, like, to answer the question shortly, it's plenty common to be accepted with no publications.
I can just say I had one like sent to the publisher, but not finished at the time of my application.
Great. Like I mentioned before, I had, I think, a conference proceeding or two, but nothing in a peer-reviewed journal. So, yeah, I guess it's difficult to really extrapolate from individual experiences, but I would say, like, do the best you can in your research to try and hit milestones of, like, completing a project, getting the experience of going through all of the parts of it, and don't worry too much if that doesn't necessarily lead to a publication.
Yeah, I feel like maybe like a broader sense is just showing like scientific communication in some way. Like I mentioned earlier, like I didn't have a publication, but I like went to like conferences, even just at my school level. I like did a lot of conferences there and like I published in like a school journal. So like even though my work never led to like a peer-reviewed like publication, like I still found ways to communicate what I was doing.
Awesome. Okay, next question. What types of volunteering impact the application? For example, how does teaching experience compare to social work? Michael?
I'd say what is kind of most important, at least for me, when I like was doing these applications, was I kind of realized that you needed like a narrative. And so if you could like, say you do a lot of social work, for example, and it ties into some fundamental belief you have and it, ties into who you are as a person, then it's important to talk about. But, as long as you touch on things you do and touch on why they're important and why they'll make you a better, fit, better candidate, then I think it's all important things, the things you do.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's a straightforward answer of whether teaching versus social work is more beneficial to your application. I think these are both things where the correct place to talk about them is the personal statement, because these aren't, strictly aspects of the research that you've done or the things that you plan to do, which I would say is more generally the intent of the statement of purpose. But exactly as Michael said, if you're crafting a narrative to tell the admissions committee who you are and the kinds of things that you would contribute to this community, which are research and otherwise. And so I think both of these have a place.
Shelley?
Yeah, I agree with Kaylin and Michael. I think, whatever you do, it should tell who you are as a person. And you should really explain your personal statement, why you chose what you do and why that matters so much to you. And I will say, if you are looking to TA in grad school, like if you're applying to work under a professor who may not have sufficient funding, having teaching experiences in undergrad is very important.
Great. Let's move on to the next question. What should I include in an email to a potential advisor? How long should it be? How to avoid making it seem like a generic and personal email without writing too much? Should we include our CV in the email? Anybody have any recommendations? Shelley?
Yes, I do recommend including your CV and briefly talking about, what you've done in undergrad. One strategy that I recommend is actually reading some of the papers that the professors have published and mention those papers in your email and explain why, like, you find them interesting and how, you want to continue doing that, maybe when you go to grad school and work under them.
I think Michael Reif comes next.
Yes, the two Michaels. I just wanted to add to that briefly. Also ask them a question about their research, because that demonstrates that not only have you read it, but you're interested in it and you want to learn more about it. So yeah, just that small thing.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
But yeah, my advice would be that more often than not, when you cold email professors like this for admissions, you're not going to get a response. And I think that if you, to be brief, don't be annoying. Don't send them like, a page and an email. They're busy people. And if they see an email that's super long from someone they don't know yet, they're just more likely going to ignore you. So it's definitely important to be concise and don't sit there and say all like you can attach your CV, yes, but I'd say don't like sit there and talk all about yourself. Just like be really interested in the research. Like Michael said, ask questions, talk about their papers, like Shelley said. And it's just like starting a conversation, but don't have it like an info dump and then just like hope they respond. You want to make it like enticing for them to respond.
And Kyle?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention sort of a different purpose of email that you might be sending. So we've been talking about emails if you're trying to like start a conversation with this professor or something like that. But another kind of email that you might be sending is just one to learn, are they taking students or not, which is going to be more likely to get a response. And there you want it to be really just like a 1 to 2 sentence email, like make it very quick and to the point. And that is, I think might make it more likely that you would at least get the yes or no, I am or am not taking students for this year sort of email.
Okay. Next question, how is the course structure in MIT When are we doing research? When we apply for physics grad admissions, do we need to contact the professors we're interested in advance? Scholarships for foreigners. Okay, in the interest of time, I'll answer this, but the course structure is such that we have 4 core physics requirements that you can either complete as classes or by taking an exam. And then you'll have 2, sometimes 3 specialty requirements for the specific division that you're in. For example, astrophysics, condensed matter experiment, etc. And then you'll need to take 2 breadth courses that are classes in physics that are outside of your field of study. And then I think we already talked about contacting professors, and all of the students in our physics program are fully funded through a combination of TA, RA, or fellowship. And I don't think that there's huge differences in consideration between if you're international or if you're a domestic student. The only thing that will be different is if you're an international student, you won't be eligible to take on temporary, like short-term payment positions like grading or anything else during the academic year when you're sort of already considered like full-time. So yeah. And I'll go through some of the rest of these really fast. Process for obtaining an application fee waiver for an international student works the same as for a domestic student, so I'll point you to the same resources. Where do I apply for the mentor application has already also been accepted. Recommend reach out to professors, we already talked about. Maybe the next question that I'll pass off to the panelists is for international students who don't have access to big research labs, what matters more in the application, research projects or recommendation letters? Does anyone want to speak on this?
I guess I would say maybe that they kind of come hand in hand. Like you want a letter from someone who knows your ability to conduct research, right? That's what the letters should be saying, right? They should be vouching for your ability to be successful at performing research in the PhD program. So usually that will be with someone who you had did something that was related to research. Maybe that was a lab course or something like this, but yeah.
I think I saw another hand.
That was me, and I was going to say the same thing, that there should be that a strong application will have harmony between your research projects and your recommendation letters, where the story that you've put forth as to the kind of research you've done and the skills that you've developed from it match up with what your recommenders are able to say about your skills as an applicant, as a person, researcher, etc.
Great. I see the next question is what is considered a good score for the physics GRE? And I didn't, did any of the panelists take the physics GRE? Okay.
I
If you
didn't
have
because I'm
anything you'd
old.
like to add, then please do.
I guess it's been so long for me that I don't really remember, but I think like the, median scores and stuff like that are kind of out there. So, MIT is a competitive application and it's kind of up to your judgment whether you think your score is going to harm or help your application. And, based on your judgment of that, you can decide whether or not to submit it. But certainly don't submit a score if you think it's going to harm your application.
Great. And I just want to point out that we're on the hour, so maybe we can do one final question and then we'll wrap up. I know that we have lots and lots of questions that are still unanswered. And before I hand it off, I just want to remind everybody that we have office hours, we have the one-on-one mentorship, and there's also the opportunity to, if you have application questions, to direct them also through some of the official admissions question channels. So maybe we'll wrap up on the question of how should applicants balance technical research descriptions with personal motivations in the statement of purpose? Michael?
I mean, I'd say again, it's like a narrative. Like you start, like the way I did it, I had a bunch of varying research experiences that didn't really tie together, honestly. So I started at the beginning and I kind of tied them together in in a narrative which was like drawn together by my like personal motivation, but in it I had like a sentence or two or three depending on like the importance of the project to me. Like the projects that more closely aligned with what I'm doing now, I added a little bit more detail, but like some of the other ones that were just kind of like random, I added a bit less because they were outside of my field.
Okay, lots of hands. Kyle.
I'm just going to say the sort of required thing that you should not start your statement when I was a child, I stared up at the stars, and that's why I want to study physics. Narratives are great. Make sure it's your narrative and not everybody's narrative.
And Shelley?
Yeah, I'd say don't mention too much technical details. Do mention them in maybe like one sentence or two for each research experience, but overall you want to showcase who you are as a researcher and why you want to pursue the research that you do. So make sure that shines through in your essay.
That's a really good point. And just to kind of bounce off of that, keep in mind that the people who will read your application might not necessarily be like the subfield expert. So make sure that whatever technical description you're giving could be sort of like broadly understood and appreciated by any physics researcher, any physics faculty. Okay, so with that, I know that we still have many more questions, but I want to thank all of you all for attending and also all of our panelists for giving us their time. And we really hope to see you all at our one-on-one mentorship program and also in our office hours coming up. And so we look forward to seeing you all back then. Thank you.